I would like to let you guys know that we have hit a milestone for my toddler. It is her first time coloring on walls with crayons.
Wonderful.
I just looked over and went, oh no, I did not consider that she would color on the wall with the crayons. So, I mean, I guess it happens to, it's what's going to happen at some point, but congratulations, it happened live on the podcast.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
Hello and welcome everybody to this month's episode of Women in AV. Today, joining us are a couple of really amazing guests. I'm so glad to have them. But first, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Jennifer Goodyer. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello. Thank you for bearing with me. We are having a really reality episode today because I have a cold and a toddler in the background. But that's part of being a woman in AV is you're also a mother in AV. So thank you for our guests so much for joining us as well. We have Sherri Beck. She's the Director of Learning and Development at AVI-SPL. Hello, Sherri. How you doing?
Hi, Jennifer.
She's actually a returning guest. Thank you for returning to our podcast. And then we have Gladys Marroquin. She's an AV consultant at Newcomb Boyd. And she's actually here in Atlanta with Erica and I. So we have 3 Atlanta people on the podcast today. So should we just jump right into it since this is such a huge topic? We need as much time as we possibly can. I think so we're talking about diversity, and I wanted to just start first with the definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which that refers to the organizational frameworks that seek to promote the fair treatment and full participation of all people, particular groups who have historically been underrepresented or subject to discrimination on the basis of identity or disability. So I know Sherri knows all about that because Sherri actually has is it a degree or a certification from USF and DE?
A certification from the University of South Florida here in Tampa. I want to say that when the program started, they had went global with 15,000 people registered for this certification. So it was a pretty big certification.
Wow. Yeah, I'd say so. And it's important for that. I mean, we're going to touch on it, but it's really important for all organizations to recognize DEI. That's a real thing, and it's something that they should put stock in. AVI-SPL is a huge organization. What do you feel has made the most impact from what you've learned from DEI?
Engagement, employee engagement, employees coming together. For example, we have 5 ERGs, employee resource groups, which is a component of DEI, and the certification was all about what companies can do to further DEI initiatives in their organization. And creating employee resource groups is one of those items that can be launched to help foster DEI at your organization. So at AVI-SPL, we have 5. We have an ERG that supports our veterans. AV Vets is the name of that group. We have Culture Coalition that supports different cultures. We have Elevate that supports women or gender equity in AV technology. We have ABLE, which empowers our employees with disabilities. And then we have Open, advocating for orientation and identities for all gender expressions. So that would be, I think, an important component, allowing employees to lead those groups, come up with initiatives, and actually implement those initiatives to better support and embrace DEI overall.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for.
So I'd like to ask Gladys, can you explain to us in your own words, I know that you've come up in AV for a bit now, why DEI is so important to our industry?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's many reasons why DEI is important. I think one of the major ones, just, when we think long term and what this industry is going to look like or what we want it to look like in the future, I think, when it comes to diversity and being as inclusive as possible and just trying to hire more diverse people and, make sure that those voices are heard, I think that encourages, future generations such as, Gen Alpha that now they're teenagers, so they're looking ahead as well as they're starting PSATs or SATs and looking into college options and what their career is going to look like those first few years, and kind of seeing AV maybe if that's something they're exposed to, and we want to encourage and kind of welcome everybody, right? Because as the United States population grows, we all kind of know that it will get more diverse as we grow as a population. So it's important to have that reflect within our industry. So again, Generation Alpha and kids that are now looking to the future can see, hey, this is an industry that, welcomes all sorts of people, and it's not, just older white men here where I'm not going to feel included. I'm not going to feel like I can relate to my peers. I'm not going to be heard, and just kind of have all these preconceived notions about what that experience is going to feel like. So I think that's a huge part of why it's important. Another reason, just overall, just bringing different voices to the table and just kind of having that brainstorming exercise, and knowing that we're not just kind of stuck in this homogeneous type of mindset, I guess, so that's important as well. But I would definitely say that my first point is, for me, the most profound.
Yeah, I agree. And actually that when we came up with the topic of diversity, so we've already talked that I'm I'm an Atlanta United football club fan, and our we get a different scarf every month, or there's a new one created. You don't just get it, you have to buy it. But anyways, there's a new scarf every month, and last month it was representation, which I thought was really interesting. And it ties into exactly what you're saying with the next generation moving up. It's not just that they can see diversity, but they have to see their representation as well to know that that's a safe avenue for them to take as they're, picking their career, picking, their next path as they're going into higher education, or even, straight into the workforce.
Yeah, we want them to feel as if they belong here, because I don't think everyone realizes. I think that maybe it becomes a us versus them thing for some people, where they're going, if we bring in more diversity, they're replacing me. Like, they're going to take over. If more diversity means I won't have a seat at the table any longer. And that's not what's happening. And my message to people that are against diversity, or not necessarily against diversity, but a little afraid of it or unsure why it's necessary, I just want everyone to know it's going to make not just your company more successful, but it's going to make our entire industry as a whole more successful, because you do need those different perspectives at the table in decision-making roles. So when you are designing systems, when you are designing rooms, you need different perspectives. I was just watching an episode of a TV show where the person was disabled in a wheelchair and nothing was accessible to them. And it was really sad to see that, they can't see through a peephole. They can't get through the bathroom door. It's just, it ends up seeming like dumb things. But if there was maybe someone who was disabled, or there was more diversity on the decision making to that room, they would make better decisions to include more people.
Sherri, what kind of strategies would you suggest for other small businesses to try to incorporate more DEI principles into their own culture or operations?
I think, and to Gladys's point, with the newer generations, what have they been taught about diversity, equity, inclusion? And to that point, what have the boomers and the other generations been taught about diversity, equity, inclusion? So all of our new employees and our existing employees were exposed to Introduction to DEI at AVI-SPL. What is our mission statement when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion? How can you get involved to better our environment? And in education, we've got e-learnings on not just the introduction to what it is, but on subtopics such as allyship, inclusion, microaggressions. These are all terms that not everyone has been exposed to. So I think it's educating It's having our leadership team emulate those particular items and ensuring that all employees are aware, including harassment, which is, in the United States as well as other countries, since we're global, there are different harassment policies where we do have to require to train our employees on how to identify harassment, how to report harassment when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those are all important educational factors. And the fact that I work in learning and development, of course, I'm passionate about, developing our employees to understand and recognize these concepts.
Gladys, when you're working on AV designs or new projects, do you incorporate DEI thought process into your considerations?
To be honest, so AV, of course, as we all know, it's a very technical, process. I mean, it's a technical field. So when it comes to the gear and the equipment, right, that's going to be decided by the client and kind of what they're used to. So I wouldn't say that for that aspect, there's no DEI, sorry, thought. However, I think where it matters and where we implement it is with our client interactions and kind of, being mindful of how we interact, using, our empathy and kind of our social cues and things like that. If you're working with someone who, is a person of color, maybe they have an accent, maybe they don't, you try to be mindful with that and kind of try to understand, again, social cues, because it might not be something that, the majority of Americans are used to. I mean, for example, an accent, one time, now it wasn't in my current role, but I worked with someone who had a pretty strong accent. However, I was raised by immigrants, so an accent to me is nothing new. And conversing with her, it came naturally to me. I didn't need any repetitions from her. I didn't need her to repeat herself constantly. And she pulled me aside one day and she was just like, "Hey, Gladys, you're the only person who has never asked me to repeat myself." And I'm just like, really? Like, that's wild to me, because I really don't think, like, yes, you have an accent, but I don't think it's that strong to have you repeat every sentence, So that's where, diversity matters, right? Where you can understand people in a way that others may not be able to understand them. So it's more social than it is technical, I think.
Yeah, on the point of the accents, as you know, Gladys, we're both from South Florida or the West Palm Beach area. And so I was just back in Orlando last week and I ran into one of our dealers that he is originally from Puerto Rico. And we were talking about the differences now that I'm in Atlanta and everything. And I was saying how I miss being able to get cafe con leche like anywhere, like a really good one and really good Cuban food anywhere. And it's like now I have Erica has to guide me. But she's done a great job. She's found me the good Cuban food, but it's not like it's on every corner. And he said that he's not able to get as many jobs in the South because they don't understand him. And I was sitting there speaking to him, but it's just because I've always been immersed in that my entire, it's like Miami there's a little Havana there. Exactly. It's like, you're just, when you're immersed in that and accents. And I mean, it's the same deal in all of Florida. I know Sherri feels the same way about Tampa. You don't second guess an accent, but there are places in the US where they can't understand you. And instead of trying, they just write it off.
There's assumptions made there, right? As far as intelligence goes. And that's, that's a good point, right? Because for some of us, we're used to it. And it's, to me, I understood her as I'm sure you understood him crystal clear.
Yeah. I didn't think anything of it when he said that. I went, really? They don't understand you? But that's got to be tough. And if you don't have people on your team that can speak multiple languages, you're kind of setting yourself up for a little bit of failure there as well.
Yeah, totally agree.
Or people who haven't been in positions where they have to listen to people who speak on other languages, right?
Yes.
So same, I was raised by immigrants, so listening to other people speaking English or even broken English, comes easily to me. And I think that's a valuable experience to have and a valuable background to have for those types of interactions.
Just to your point, I did grow up in South Florida, and it was mandatory for us to take the secondary languages when we were in, I think as early as middle school, I was taking Spanish. And we recently acquired a company in Mexico where we wanted to translate some of our content into Spanish for our Spanish speaking employees because they were not bilingual. And one of my employees I had, helping me translate, who's never taken any other foreign language, she grew up in a different part of the country, in Connecticut, where it wasn't a requirement. So it's just interesting, even the diversity of where we're growing up and what the expectations are for acknowledging the diversity of the languages that are spoken in that area. I found that very interesting.
So I'd like to ask Sherri another question about companies and implementing DEI strategies, because I don't think that we have anything directly in that particular category. But what if a company doesn't have the resources to afford like DEI certified advisors or anything like that? What kind of steps can they take to still effectively learn and implement DEI principles?
Wow, great question. And we were lucky enough to be able to engage a consultant to help us. There are so many resources out there, though, that do not cost anything. The whole certification at USF, that was completely free, 8-week program. Other universities are latching onto that concept, and it's available because it's such an important concept. A lot of the content that I've also found that I didn't have to pay for come in the simple terms of TED Talks. Just powerful TED Talks about diversity, equity, inclusion. I would say I would start with crafting your DEI mission statement. Again, that could be free. Forming a committee to come up, what is our mission statement? Again, go to your friend Google for resources on crafting mission statements. I'm sure there's plenty of free content out there. Start with a mission statement, and then I would start with some of those free resources. Even just pushing out, a TED Talk or a YouTube video on what is allyship or diversity inclusion. There's great resources. There's a really great, trying to remember her name, I think the last name is maybe Valerie Anderson, How to Outsmart Your Own Unconscious Bias. Great TED Talk, highly recommend. It will change your perception about biases immediately. Impactful. I think Valerie Anderson, How to Outsmart Your Own Unconscious Bias. Start with simple free items like that. Even bringing, for smaller organization, your team together to evaluate some of this content. Come together in a Teams meeting virtually or together if you can, and actually talk about the impact it had on you. That'd be a great start for DE&I.
That's awesome. Gladys, have you had any sort of formal DEI initiatives at Newcomb Boyd, or have you had any experience with that?
Oh, I don't think we've had any formal ones. So yeah, now this might be a little bit of a hot take, but from my experience, and again, it's just my experience. I mean, I haven't been at a firm as large as AVI-SPL. So, and I read that article about Intel being on the list of top DEI companies to work for, and their metrics of how they measured that. I think some of them were really good. But when we talk about just general DEI, I think there is a little bit of a stigma within, marginalized groups. And I'm not going to speak for all of us, but there is a known stigma when it comes to DEI and kind of, getting the feeling that sometimes these initiatives can be a little performative. So with that being said, right, I do appreciate that Newcomb Boyd, I feel that they treat all of their employees with respect, dignity, and they're valued and they're compensated well. And I think that in itself reflects a lot about the company in terms of diversity, especially, giving everyone, good opportunities, guiding them and having them grow into roles that are elevated within the company. I think that's that's pretty reflective in itself. You know, I personally would prefer that over, you know, other experiences that I've had where a company claims that they are, you know, pro diversity and pro women in AV, and then, you know, they'll talk the talk, but they won't walk the walk, if you know what I mean. So, so that in itself is kind of where I land with that. But I do know that there are companies, when it comes to DEI, there are specific initiatives that are about compensation, salary, and kind of those types of action items. So that I think is super important. But no, at Newcomb Boyd, I don't think there's a specific initiative that we have going on.
That's why I wanted to look at that specific Forbes list that you were talking about, where we saw that Intel was not top 10, they were 11, but at least we know there's a tech company that's on the list of top 20 at least. But what I liked about that list is it was anonymous. So it wasn't employees going, and it was anonymous based on their own thoughts and what was important to them. So it wasn't a company, we've talked about this before, but companies patting themselves on the back. So it wasn't that type of situation. Yeah. It was truly, they were anonymous with that.
Yeah, I read the metric, because there's a link within that article that kind of goes through the methodology and the metrics, and it was good to see that it had substance. It had substance, essentially, versus it just being performative. Yeah.
So I didn't read that article. What types of things did they do to measure that impact?
So they asked, or they measured kind of, you know, women in executive roles, for instance. They talked about retention, I believe is one of them, which is also a pretty good metric in my opinion. And I'm pretty sure compensation was on there as well, where how everybody stacked, you know, alongside each other, dependent on skills and experience.
Sherri, do you all do that? You have a few different groups and initiatives there at AVI-SPL. What kind of indicators do you look for to measure the efficacy of all those efforts?
Well, each of the employee resource groups that I mentioned, they present their findings back to an executive DEI council. For example, one group looked at our job descriptions and deemed that even our job descriptions may not have represented DE&I appropriately enough in some of the language used. And so even though I don't have access to those metrics, I know that they look at metrics in form of projects and initiatives and the changes that are being made based on the recommendations from each of those ERGs. And I'm sure that, I mean, for one metric, for example, I know that AVI-SPL, we're kind of above average in the AV industry for women at AVI-SPL, but ironically enough, my boss just mentioned today we need to promote more women. So we're at 18%, at least that's the last metric that I had, and I think the industry on a whole, last I heard, again, this may be a pre-COVID figure, was around 12%. So you know, those are just examples, managing the volume of initiatives that are implemented because of this group, and then always keeping an eye. Again, I don't have any diversity metrics, but I know our HR team does track a lot of those metrics globally because we are a global organization and want to make sure that women are represented in all of the offices and countries that we represent, and other ethnicities and cultures are representative around the globe. I hope to do more of that in the future, get more you know, immersed in the data and the metrics. And I think that we have an initiative happening now where we're getting more engaged in the employee experience. And I think that has a direct correlation to DE&I. So the new employee experience manager will be looking at data and metrics and doing more surveys across the global organization so we can collect more of that data. So that's an exciting initiative that I'm looking forward to.
It's obviously no secret that I'm a giant Sherri Beck fan. I've made that clear many times. But one of the things that I liked the most about you when I was meeting you, learning about you, was that I knew you were in charge of education at AVI-SPL, and that also DEI was like a personal passion of yours. So I thought how cool for their organization is the person that's in charge of education also has a passion for DEI. So I think that my takeaway from that is if you can't necessarily afford to bring on a DEI consultant, you can't have a person that's dedicated to that. If you're passionate about it within your industry, try to incorporate it into your company. If you try to be the DEI consultant, dude, like you said, watch the podcasts, read the books. You can do it yourself if you have to.
Absolutely. And if you can't do it across your organization, educate your team, your coworkers, your peers, speak to your manager, or if you're a manager of people, bring a DEI topic to your team meetings, talk about what does it mean to be an ally? What does inclusion mean? There's a variety of resources out there. Like I said, be the catalyst in your small team, and maybe it can grow across the organization.
I don't want to take this like totally off topic, but I am intrigued to learn, and maybe Sherri, you might know a little bit better. When did DEI really become more prominent, and what kinds of problems were we seeing or we facing at the time where it sort of spawned this, wow, we really need to make a change, and DEI is the answer?
That's a great question. So I received my certification in 2021. That was right in the middle of COVID pandemic. What sparked it? It could be a little bit of Black Lives Matter, maybe all of the different controversies happening. It could have some political, items that were going on. There were sexual harassment cases. I think they reached a head at some point. And I want to say it could have been 2020, 2021, when some of those horrible news stories were bubbling to the surface, that I think it became more important to organizations to protect themselves against, some of these claims that were going on. Is like, we have to educate our employees to be whistleblowers if something is not right. We have to train them to recognize. We have to train them the behaviors that are expected within our organization. And again, it's not just one topic. You've heard me, there's so many topics that are involved in DE&I, from the whole harassment, which isn't always sexual harassment. It's using words, microaggressions, being condescending to your team. It could be using profanity in the workplace. It's not feeling that you have an ally, anybody to support you. For women sitting around the table, not feeling you have a voice to speak up at the table. There are so many topics that are involved with DE&I that, in my opinion, I think it's always been here. I can think back at cases back in the 90s, with harassment, and I just think it reached a head around that 2020, 2021 time, when it was just so prevalent in the news.
That article about the Forbes top 10 DEI companies to work for. So that one actually mentions that this whole DEI initiative kind of bubbled up in 2015. It states during the George Floyd protests. So
George Floyd.
That's kind of, So like Sherri was saying, political strife essentially is how it started in the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yeah. I was trying not to mention any names, but in my head, Bill Cosby and the politicians and the Monica Lewinsky. I don't know where it started.
It runs deep.
So if that's a really eye-opening point, that it was even way before the pandemic is when this all sort of started rolling. So now I'd like to look in the future, and what is a goal? What is achievable for us to realize when we've reached that whatever we're reaching towards has been accomplished?
For me, I would like to see that every company has, because I really liked, I think it was Sherri that said it, that your company should have a DEI mission statement. I would like to see that every company at least addresses it. It's like, if you don't have the manpower to enforce it to its highest ability, at least you know it exists.
Well, since I work in HR, I would say a metric that we can look at is seeing the number of formal complaints and anonymous complaints, because we do have an anonymous resource that if you think something is unethical or shouldn't be happening, or even if you have positive feedback, it's an anonymous venue. But to see the complaints and the issues reduced over time.
That's a good tangible metric. To be honest, I'm not sure. I think mine would be more abstract. I think that would be very difficult to measure. But for me personally, I think it would look like or feel like, I can be my complete self in the workplace or just in the industry in general, and not have to, second guess like, oh, I don't know if people are going to understand that. Like, for instance, something as simple as a joke that I could make. It's like, oh, will people actually get that? Is that going to be controversial? Like just bringing my full personality and not, fearing that someone is going to, find anything controversial. And it's not, they're not like rude jokes or anything. It's just kind of like, I don't think people really understand some of my cultures.
Yeah, you just want to be your authentic self, which doesn't every person deserve that. Every single person deserves to be their authentic self.
In addition, I would like to be sitting at the table and seeing a diverse group around me, but not only seeing them, but knowing that they're comfortable speaking and adding their opinion to the table. Because so frequently, I think it's the minorities, right, at the table in that type of environment that are less apt to feel comfortable to speak up. And, I know we're a group of women, and sometimes it is the women who, because we're outnumbered by our male counterparts, that sometimes don't speak our opinion about whatever the topic is at the table. And I would like to see that change, that everyone, no matter their race, ethnicity, gender expression, that everybody has an equal voice at the table.
Yeah. And also just to piggyback off of that and add to it, just, having like the majority group also be able to kind of poke at people and be like, hey, this person hasn't spoken up yet. Do you have any thoughts? That type of thing. Like I said at Newcomb Boyd, my colleagues are like that. So I feel very much supported by them at all times. But I think that is important, not to just, what it looks like for us as marginalized peoples, but also setting expectations for the majority. And just as an example, I'm not going to name any manufacturers, but I was at the Infocom last year. There was a consultant event, and I was there, with my team members, and I'm looking around the room, and there are no women in the room. Definitely no people of color. So I'm sitting there like, dang, not only am I the only person of color, so that makes me like the darkest person in there, right? And then 2, I'm the only woman in there. I'm just like, wow, this is really weird. And not that it was, I didn't feel like I couldn't speak up or anything. And that's going to vary from person to person, of course. But it was just kind of, that's something that is going on in my head, whether it's negative or positive. I'm just kind of like, it's something I think about. Whereas, the rest of the people in there are probably not thinking about that at all. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, I'm just existing, la la la. So I would definitely like for that to change as well.
That happens frequently.
It does, and I've forgotten to think about it because I just had so there's a young girl. She won a scholarship, and I was working with her and walking into Infocom. She was walking into Infocom for the first time, so she was seeing it through fresh eyes. So it's like it's almost like a Disney World thing, taking a kid for the first time. You're seeing it through fresh eyes. And the first comment she makes, I don't even recognize it anymore. First comment she made, she was like, where are the women? There's so many men here. Like, she couldn't in her, I guess where she was looking, she didn't spot one woman. And I think maybe common. We're so used to it that I didn't even go, oh, hey, wow, yeah, there isn't any. And I had to kind of reassure her and be like, no, there are some here. I'll find them, I promise. But
we have to look for them.
Yeah, that's the problem. I have to go to specific booths where I know they are, and it shouldn't be that way. And it made me kind of sad. She's young. She's 19. And it made me kind of sad that she walked in and it like hit her.
But that's just another reason why, it's really important for that. Well, I guess that person would be Gen Z, but, we don't want Gen Alpha or even Gen Z to experience, or anyone to experience that. It's just going to be more obvious as these generations grow up and they become more diverse. It's going to be more blatantly obvious to them than it would be us and older folks.
Absolutely. I remember walking on the show floor the first time over 10 years ago, and there were no women, right? If there was a woman, they were hired to stand there and be pretty and scan badges. And I'm glad that we've come far enough along where that's not as common. It still does happen, and I get that. You need somebody to work your booth, and women are usually willing to work in that capacity. So I'm just glad how far we've come to this point. And in another 10 years, I'm hoping that the first time you walk on the show floor that you can look around it and maybe at least see a 30-70 mix.
Yeah, because it'll make you feel like, hey, maybe I do belong here, instead of, am I even allowed to be here?
So that's about time for us. I'd like to thank Sherri. Thank you so much for coming back. We love having you on the show. You're such a wealth of information and experience that, we want to share people's stories and experiences. So I appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me back.
And thank you, Gladys, for joining us. Hopefully you can come back and join us again. And if not, we should definitely meet up in person here in Atlanta. Maybe we can go out for some good Cuban food.
Yeah, I like that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would love that.
You could come to Tampa. We have really awesome Cuban food.
Well, true. Yeah.
They have
where the Cuban sandwich was made.
Yes, they have the
willing,
first ever Cuban restaurant, and I went there. One of our companies took us there, and it was amazing.
If you're willing to come up to the Georgia mountains, I'll make you some Cuban food here at home. So
awesome. That sounds good too.
Come on up, Sherri. And thank you, Jennifer. And a shout out to Jennifer's daughter for joining us as well too.
That will tell you how much this podcast means to me. I have now a broken phone. So my office one is now completely broken. She's got that. I've got stickers and colors. My office has got now more personality.
Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the Women of AV podcast on avnation.tv.